Uh, hello, welcome. Welcome to our virtual dialogue roadmap to Black employee ownership. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are filing in from around the world. My name's Terron Ferguson, and I'm incredibly honored to be able to facilitate what I think will be a very deep and dynamic conversation today about a topic that is incredibly near and dear to my heart. So, before I introduce the beautiful faces that are in this first slide, I'd like to just frame up the occasion and set some context with backstory. So, um, for about a year and a half, the past year and a half, I have been serving as the first leader of Project Equity's Black Employee Ownership Initiative. Um, it's been a remarkable experience, not only learning about employee ownership, but strategizing with how we can seed this business strategy and economic tool in a community that could absolutely use it, particularly at this time. I worked very, very closely with Edwards, Project Equity CEO, and also Dr. Cynthia Hewitt, the Avalon Professor of Sociology at Morehouse College. And here's why. Because one of the first learnings and lessons that we had is that in order to really drive employee ownership in the Black business community, in the Black labor workforce, and also in the Black economic ecosystem, we would have to craft a broad, diverse coalition that is cross-sectoral in order to reach every audience, because this is a project that is about language, it's about perspective, it's about levers of influence. And so we widen our aperture at Project Equity as practitioners and struck an important alliance with Dr. Cynthia Hewitt at Morehouse College in the higher education space to be able to launch and activate research, knowledge, thinking around the utility behind employee ownership. And so this is a marriage, if you will, between the practitioner space and higher education. And we believe that that partnership that has spawned not one, but two incredible papers is a nucleus for a fomenting movement that we will talk about just shortly. So this work is important. It's incredibly important because we're bringing more and more people to the field. Morehouse and Project Equity were very synergistic partners in that Project Equity has a hyper-focused ambition to activate employee ownership in Black communities. And with the fact that 1 out of every 3rd Black worker in our country lives in the southern states, it makes incredible strategic sense to broker an alliance with a venerated institution of the South and in the Black community. And if you know anything about HBCUs, if you know anything about the civil rights movement, then you know Morehouse College has always been at the vanguard of anything happening in the South with the Black workforce and with economic empowerment as a way to uplift the race. And so I'd like to just do some really basic introductions, and I'm going to talk about 2 artifacts that were born out of this partnership. And then I want to turn it over to my panelists, my team, my friends. On the left side of the screen, you see Evan Edwards. Many of you might already know him. He's the CEO of Project Equity. I consider him an incredible thought partner and mentor, and he's the person who opened the door to employee ownership for me, and he does that for many others. And so before asking Evan to speak, I just want you guys to just recognize him. And next, we have Dr. Cynthia Hewitt, who is the Avalon Professor of Sociology at Morehouse College. She also is the director of the International Comparative Labor Studies program, and she is the author behind one of the papers that I'll reference now. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So these are 2 artifacts that emerged from this partnership, and we're going to take a deeper dive into the conversation about the content therein. On the left side, you see research study Employee Ownership for Black Workers, Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. This was authored by Dr. Cynthia Hewitt, published in partnership with Morehouse and other partners from the International Comparative Labor Studies program at Morehouse. And this paper is very much arrayed to an academic audience, really, really trying to seed this topic in a community that has some awareness issues about it. And I'll let Dr. Hewitt share more about that. But one amazing byproduct of this is Project Equity identifying the need for a tactical, strategic companion piece that is arrayed towards practitioners in the field, elevating best practices and North Stars and innovative ways for us to do this work at a deeper and more impactful level. So shameless plug, but you ought to pick up copies of both of these papers. They can be found on both Project Equity's website and Morehouse College ICLS website. They're great reads, brisk reads, and very, very informative reads. And so without further ado, the first thing I'd like to do is ask Dr. Hewitt, given your background in labor studies, your understanding of cooperative economics, what was your attraction to employee ownership in the first place? And what was probably a major takeaway or insight from your findings in the study? Just a second, Dr. Hewitt. We've got to unmute you. There we go.
Sorry about that. My background is in the study of political economy as a sociologist, and I've always focused on how the Black community and really the Africana community in a global sense can move this final phase of, I won't say final, but move this phase of liberation from civil rights to one of adequate human rights, or really adequate economic sustainable well-being. So in this struggle, we started by looking at Black people as workers. About 80% of our population are in fact earning a wage and do constitute the working class. So when we at Morehouse talk about social justice or economic justice in particular, this is the group of people we're really talking about. Now, we also have those who constitute the informal economy and the unemployed, but altogether, the base and the strength is usually found in the working class. And that's the case for many of our students' parents. At the same time, there was such an unawareness of where our economic strength lies. Even though a lot of our parents have been union members, unless you ask a student specifically, they don't realize that, and they don't even think about it. So our first step was to create sort of a recursive process whereby HBCUs, Morehouse in particular, educate our students about unions and the political positions that unions support. So that was the first turn. And then as we begin to talk about what can a union do, you also know that for the Black community to become, for the well-being of the Black community to occur, you also need to have our ability to live within the cultural heritage of the African-American community. And within that cultural heritage means that we would also need to produce and fill all types of creative and productive positions. So thinking about that, it's a little different than protecting yourself as a worker. It's instead sort of projecting yourself as a creator. In the projecting yourself as a creator, you have to have control over some capital. So that's what brought us to employee ownership as sort of the inverse side of what our community needs in order to be economically well off, right? We need not only to protect ourselves when we are in the workforce, we need to be able to direct what we want to see happen in our community, how we want to work, and what we want to produce.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. It's a perfect segue into my next question for you, Evan. I heard Dr. Hewitt talk about sort of the need to do something about the lack of awareness about around employee ownership, and then this other parallel objective to reframe the paradigm about how we think about wealth creation, our sort of economic utility in the space. I want to ask you, were those sort of some of the leading hypotheses you had in bringing Project Equity to engage with Dr. Hewitt and Morehouse on this topic? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that backstory and how the trajectory came to fruition?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. From the beginning, Project Equity has had a mission to impact Black workers and communities of color more broadly through employee ownership. You know, we see it as an opportunity for economically marginalized folks to be able to build wealth. When we set about our work at Project Equity some years back and began to engage with business owners around transitioning their businesses to employee ownership, notably that work was centered in California. That's where we are. We've always had national outreach, but our initial work was centered in California. And what we found is beyond our best intentions, we had challenges engaging employers that represented a density of Black workers, right? Workers that we were really seeking to impact. And we found that not just in our work in California, but as we started to work more nationally. And we arrived at a place where we understood that if we want to be impactful to Black workers, we have to be intentional about doing that, right? And so we've always been a very data-driven organization. Anyone that's visited our website can see that we do a lot of number crunching to guide how it is that we go about developing pipeline and understanding who critical audiences are for our messages and for our work. And when we did a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of our data studies, we understood a point that Terron made earlier, that the majority of Black workers are in the South. And they're also centered in a few specific industries: healthcare, retail, and accommodations and food service. So we understood that we were going to have to reframe some of the way that we at Project Equity went about identifying pipeline of businesses to transition that were representative of a density of Black workers. We also understood that we were going to have to provide greater focus to identifying those businesses that were owned by Black folks, because we know that there is an overrepresentation of Black workers in businesses owned by Black folks. That surfaced other challenges because we came to understand a little bit more deeply about challenges that Black-owned businesses have with respect to engaging technical assistance and accessing capital, et cetera. All of these issues elevated to the extent that we said we need to have a comprehensive program, which manifested in our Black Employee Ownership Initiative. And if we want this program to be effective and thoughtful and considered beyond our expertise at Project Equity as technicians and folks that are firm believers in economic justice, that we needed to engage someone with the expertise of Dr. Hewitt, who's at an institution that is well regarded. So as we're starting to bring forward the concept of employee ownership to audiences who may be unfamiliar with it, that we're doing so with the grounding and the background of, for instance, collective economics in Black communities, and grounded in a region such as Atlanta, where there is the representation of the density of workforce and Black business owners. And so that was kind of the impetus for us to go ahead and decide that we were going to develop this initiative. We also recognized that we were going to need to resource it. And so I think it's appropriate that I acknowledge Prudential and the Delta Fund, who both have underwritten our ability to execute both the research paper that Dr. Hewitt has authored, and for us to be able to fund our Black Employee Ownership Initiative. So in essence, it was us gaining some understanding of where it is that our operating model was not going to necessarily be as impactful as we would like it, and taking the steps to adjust it so that we could be effective. And that's how we got to Dr. Hewitt.
That's great. And I don't mean to make a trite response, but kudos to both of you for recognizing a gap, a need, and like leaning into that to try to craft a solution, right? I mean, a lot of people might take the path of least resistance towards the work, and it seems like we're going to where the tough, thorny issues are. That excites me. So let's try to get into the topics a little deeper. You know, there's 66 participants on this call right now, and the number's rising. And based on some of the introductions in the chat, seems like we got some experts here, so we can get pretty wonky. I'm just going to ask you a few high-level questions. Feel free to dialogue between one another if you'd like to. But what I would like to say to our participants, if you're anything like me, you're going to have thoughts, questions, what have you, feel free to pop them into the chat. We have reserved time at the balance of the event to raise some of those questions that you all have to our panelists. So first question is for Dr. Hewitt. You referenced the need to examine the nexus between employee ownership, all the actors in the space, and the labor unions, which have been an incredible organizing vessel specifically for Black workers in the history of our country. I wanted to just give you some space to say more about that. Like why is that important? Why in this moment? And what do you see as a North Star for that collaboration?
As we know, the labor unions have been a financial supporter and a political supporter as African Americans have come into the electoral process, as well as supporting equal employment opportunity, protection for workers, and all the things that we know, like the 8-hour day, come from the support of unions. So we might not think that there's an automatic connection between unions and businesses. And so even this idea, even the concept of employee ownership sometimes is considered in terms of large businesses where they may have an ESOP or other employee benefit in place. But the largest employee-owned businesses that we have been encountering are often actually unionized. So if we take the largest one that I am aware of, which is the, let me see, the Healthcare Associates. So I guess that's the, I want to call them CHCA in New York. They have about 2,000 members, and they're members of the Service Employees International Union. So what we see is that, I have other instances. The City University of New York has a School of Labor and Urban Studies, and their professor, Rebecca Lurie, who works with employee-owned companies, she comes out of the construction trades, and she too talked about where there's potential for the overlap. So on the one hand, people might think unions and private businesses don't go together, but an employee-owned business that has a union base has the benefits that a union gives. So for instance, a union will help solidify training opportunities within whatever industry that the employee-owned business is entering into. Union members are also very familiar with how to work cooperatively, how to make decisions, how to do elections, how to resolve disputes. These are all trainings that unions bring to you. So when you have your membership also when your membership retains union membership while becoming owners of their own operation, that's a really excellent. I think that's an excellent place to be. Here in Georgia, we've started to bring the concept of employee ownership to the Atlanta, North Georgia Labor Council, and whose new president, Sandra Williams, I guess is the first African-American to hold that position, African-American woman to hold that position. And then we also are going to be bringing it with Ms. Yvonne Brooks, who is now, at this point, she is interim president of the AFL-CIO Georgia. So at the level of organized labor in the state, we think we have an open door to bring together business, small and medium business, workers' interests, and also these unions.
Thank you. And to your point about open door, I love that phrase. I think that Evan has often talked about like the need, the us meeting the moment, and there's a particular urgency at the national level for this type of work. So Evan, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of set that stage. Like, why is this work so incredibly important right now? What's the big opportunity from a United States economic policy perspective? I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I think what we're trying to do is figure out our lanes and our ways of getting into this deeply.
Yeah, so, to Dr. Hewitt's point, labor unions are a force, and it would be wonderful if, among other things, that we saw a stronger labor movement in this country. We do see it reemerging, but we also know that there aren't enough Black workers that are supported by labor unions. There are a lot of Black workers that are in businesses that, quite frankly, might be too small or not in a position to be organized. And so from the perspective of us wanting to have deep impact of Black workers, the particular moment that we're in is fairly unique in that the vast majority of small and middle market businesses in this country, those with payrolls, are owned by baby boomers. And you all have heard Project Equity talk about the silver tsunami. We're at this period where those baby boomers are going to be retiring and exiting their businesses. We have, lots of data that shows that those businesses are only a fraction of them will end up selling, right? And transitioning within families. And so the opportunity is for us to identify those businesses and transition them to employee ownership. And our focus in particular on the national level is to find those businesses that are representative of the populations that Project Equity wants to impact. And so, we see ourselves as another opportunity for wealth building alongside labor unions for rank and file workers, and in particular Black rank and file workers that don't otherwise see those pathways. There are in a given year 50,000 or more businesses that are listed for sale, right? Only a small fraction of those businesses business owners have any awareness of a model that could transition ownership of their business that would allow them to see a return on their investment. And so, we see ourselves, Project Equity, as, not only positively impacting workers, but to the extent that, many business owners and, in terms of our impact goals, Black business owners oftentimes shut down their businesses and never have the opportunity to see a return. We also know that a lot of Black business owners tend to see their businesses as a paycheck and not necessarily an investment in which they're going to see a return on investment. So it's really important for us to elevate this work nationally with it in mind that we're impacting the workers that we want to impact. We're impacting business owners that otherwise might not be able to attain the wealth that they otherwise would. And we're doing this in an environment where we see labor reemerging, and we see ourselves side by side with the labor movement in terms of growing wealth for those communities.
Great answer. The way I see this like conversation flowing in my mind, we set the context, both of our both perspectives in terms of how we got to this work, and I love that each of you enumerated the opportunities that you see. So let's like jump ahead, because both sides have done some really deep work thinking about this, and let's talk about some of the solutions that we've kind of figured out, some hypothesis, ways in which we want to activate this work. So Dr. Hewitt, I know you talked about the lack of knowledge, and you have a lot of great ideas and activities to try to cure that. I'd like to hear you maybe discuss with the group some of the ways you're activating the work. And then Evan, I'll ask you the same question, but in the practitioner space.
So we focus our ICLS program focuses on preparing students to enter into careers of service to community, and also that allow them to raise a family. So all activism doesn't allow that, but we particularly want to guide our students to being able to use their skills in that kind of way. So bringing employee ownership to the students is our number one objective. We work with the Morehouse Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center, led by Dr. Tiffany Bussey, in preparing them to see businesses and see business opportunities that can be translated into an employee-owned situation. So this year we'll begin training our students to be able to help us to do outreach work in the community. As well as we begin to do more outreach, we are looking forward to bringing basic education about employee ownership through our alumni network, which is very substantial and well positioned in the arena of both local politics and policy and other types of positions. So we are organizing an alumni network to also carry the word, and we will also organize with our chapel, because it's very clear that many people here just have not heard of it, and definitely all those arenas can be approached. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing. I should also say that we're continuing our research. We are working again with the help of Project Equity and a research project to interview more extensively Black businesses, owners and workers, to find out what their feelings are, what their needs are, their response to employee ownership. So we are doing that in conjunction with Project Equity also.
Tracking. And what about you, Evan?
Yeah, so I feel like the best answer to that question is, what aren't we doing? Because we've got a lot of irons in the fire. We've identified a handful of regions where we really want to plant the flag and activate this work. So Atlanta is one, Birmingham is a second, South Florida, where you are, Terron, is a third, and Chicago is a fourth. Each of these regions is representative of density of Black workforce, and also significant number of Black-owned businesses. We have partnerships beyond our partnership with Morehouse throughout these regions to raise awareness. And it was really important for us to partner with, for instance, in Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, because that's an organization that has credibility in the region, has worked with small and middle market businesses in the past, and has their trust. And it's been really important for us to be able to bring along AWBI and some of our other partner organizations and understanding about employee ownership, so that they're able to bring us into those regions and begin to have conversations with capital, with technical assistance providers, with other stakeholders in the nonprofit community, all of whom can serve to raise awareness of employee ownership. Dr. Hewitt's comment about the way that Morehouse is activating the student population is really important from a number of perspectives for us. We understand that a lot of, excuse me, a lot of Black-owned businesses are going to be what we refer to as micro businesses, those with workforces of less than 10 workers. Those are a little bit more challenging for us to transition to employee ownership, and also sometimes have more economic fragility. And so the young folks at Morehouse who engage with these small business owners through the Morehouse Innovation Lab will be able to do work to advance what we call preparedness for employee ownership transition. So we essentially see ourselves as seeding employee ownership knowledge in the academy at Morehouse, and then having that knowledge be exported in the community. So there's a lot of awareness raising we're doing initially. We're also, again, engaging with our partners to start to develop pipeline to identify businesses that are good candidates for employee ownership. And that work entails us doing business engagement activities in the community, whether they be webinars, or nowadays we're able to have in-person events more frequently. So we're beginning to engage with practitioners and with business owners, with business connectors, all of whom we see as being trusted voices of business owners. That's one of the places that we've started our work. Another thing that's really important that I think that we're doing, and I think this is taking the long view, is that we understand that our success in these first 4 communities that we're working will allow us to advance this work more broadly, nationally. So as we are doing this work in the community, in these communities, we are capturing our experiences so that we can share them in other communities that we want to advance this work, and so that folks in those other regions that we want to influence Black employee ownership, amongst them other cities in the North, great migration areas throughout Texas. I don't know that everybody's familiar. Texas has more Black workers than any other state in the country, right? So we'd like to see our work move into some of these other regions, but we want to capture our success stories in Atlanta, Birmingham, South Florida, and Chicago as we move to advance this work. So those are some of the things that we're doing right now in order to see this work move forward.
That's incredible. I love the emphasis on a multi-pronged approach. Oftentimes people want a silver bullet solution to really difficult problems, when in actuality, it's probably doing a whole lot of things, and the cumulative effect is what has the real impact. So I think that's wonderful. From my vantage point, I see your 2 institutions like really flanking this issue. You have the student engagement, alumni, youth piece that's trying to instill this as a viable opportunity for career and social justice in the next generation. And then Project Equity seems to be all around the country trying to prepare the ground so that there are real practical opportunities for that next generation of leaders. If I can just share a little bit about my background. When I was at Morehouse College, because Morehouse is my alma mater, I was arrayed to go directly to law school. And then I learned of an organization called Teach for America. And I was very heavily recruited to join Teach for America. And the framing was kind of similar. We were at a precipice in our country where education was in a really, really delicate place. And I could make a difference if I went into the classroom and tried to apply some of my learning from college, my capabilities, and just being getting aware of the issues. And I kind of see that same type of instance brooding again, and it really energizes me. So with that being said, I have a very vivid imagination. I want to ask each of you, I'll take Evan first, and then Dr. Hewitt, you can go second. I want you to think forward, and this thing is working. How will you know? How will you know that we have embedded employee ownership in the Black wealth agenda? What's that indicator for you, Evan, that drives you doing this work? And then same question for you, Dr. Hewitt.
Yeah, I think that one of the key aspects of our work always is ecosystem development, right? And what we mean by ecosystem development is that all of the participants in the business sale or transition or advisory space are aware of employee ownership and can serve as either referral points for businesses being transitioned, or can provide resources such as capital, such that transitions can get done. And I think we will know that we have had some impact, that we have embedded employee ownership when those business connectors, those folks that operate through the ecosystem, are regularly referring businesses for transition, and in particular businesses that are representative of Black workers, right? And so we are still developing our impact measurement methodology, but we do know that the communities that we're working with and that we're partnering with are going to help us to advance our ability to be able to engage with their ecosystems and with businesses specifically. And as we're doing that, one of the things that I think that we're really good at Project Equity is gathering the data. And we will gather that data because it's important for us to be able to, again, exhibit that this is working. And so, Terron, I think that for us, as we delve into this work, I think we're still understanding exactly how it is that we'll measure, but I do know that that the ecosystem development portion of this is really important, where we're starting to see that Black employee ownership becomes self-replicating.
I love that, and I can see that. I can totally see we activate this flywheel, and then the momentum just continues on itself. What about you, Dr. Hewitt? How will you know? You're muted.
I'll know because we'll see the cooperative enterprise space reach all the way back to perhaps the Morehouse College where I am, because I like to see within Atlanta more spaces that are clearly cooperatively owned, proud of it, and showing it. One of those might be a student co-op at the college, because I've seen what that does when you have students living and running their place of residence while they're at college. That's one of the main ways in which you train the next generation of cooperative leaders. So in employee ownership, I also think that I would be really, it'd be great to see that it would diffuse in or become active in some of the most important areas that are now areas where workers are really underserved. So for instance, childcare, if I see sort of an uptake of employee-owned childcare services, that would be a great thing. It's very much people are very much employed, and all of their skills, which are great skills, women who have important nurturing skills, are all being ignored in the current economy. And then another area might be construction, because again, this is a needed and booming industry where African Americans have been basically sort of squeezed out of the profitable sectors. So I think if I take those two examples, I'd like to see a burgeoning set of employee-owned enterprises in those areas. Atlanta was reported to be the most unequal city with a population over 100,000 in the United States, the single most unequal city, and it's been occupying that place for 11 years. The real deal on that statistic is that the median income, household income in Atlanta is 28,000. So that tells you that it is the low income that allows Atlanta to occupy that place of greatest inequality. So to change the situation of low income is to empower people to have control over capturing some of their returns. So I would just say that, yeah, so I would like to see another method of both income generation and then eventually wealth accrual come about in Atlanta. So that would, to me, be a great thing.
I'm tracking it. You'll know when the cooperative enterprise is much more popularized, and you even see students in your backyard doing co-ops, working in co-ops. You see EO finally penetrating these sectors that you think could desperately use this underutilized tool. And if you see the dynamics change in Atlanta, we've had this over a decade experience of gross inequality. If we can begin to narrow that, then we're on the right path. What I'll say to that is we're going to put all of these North Stars out into the ether and wish them positivity, but then collectively, all of us on this call are going to work like our hair's on fire to try to make it a reality. So I appreciate you guys for just being very honest, genuine, and earnest with your answers. We do have some questions from the participants. So how do you guys feel about me reading them out loud and you taking them? Good?
Sounds great to me.
Okay, cool. And so I think this first question is to Evan. When you help companies convert to employee ownership, are there particular forms you find most impactful? As a, for instance, ESOP versus EOT versus co-op.
So that question is going to be answered based on an analysis of the business. Co-op, ESOP, or EOT are a fit based on some characteristics of the business, economic and operational, that we usually discern at Project Equity through our feasibility assessment. That's our process of due diligence that goes beyond actually just looking at financial statements and numbers, but also looks at the business's operating capacity. As a rule of thumb, and this isn't something that we are not inflexible about, but as a rule of thumb, if a business's EBITDA is less than $750,000, it is not a fit for an ESOP, and we would look at co-op or EOT. But that's just a matter of looking at numbers. That isn't to say that a business could not be a fit for an ESOP at below that threshold. It's not saying that businesses that have EBITDA above $750,000 can't be co-ops or EOTs. So I think the best way to answer that question is it depends. And I know that might be an unsatisfying answer, but the devil is really in the details insofar as the analysis of the business and understanding what the fit might be. You know, there's going to be some business owners that might have a particular preference based on how it is they want to exit. And there's going to be some workforce issues that also might be influential of what model we pursue.
Thank you. Thank you. This next question, it was addressed to Evan, but anonymous attendee, I'm going to ask for permission to make it to invite both Dr. Hewitt and Evan to answer, because I think they both talked about the topic. The question is, in your view, what are the important components of an ecosystem that will support employee ownership or the cooperative enterprise or the cooperative enterprise?
I'll let
Evan,
Dr.
go ahead with that. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go first, Dr. Hewitt?
Okay, in order not to back and forth our poor audience, let me take a little shot at this. From our perspective as new participants in this ecosystems that exist now, we're very interested in the development of legal assistance, and we're looking forward to the emergence at Georgia State University of a cooperative clinic in their law school. So that would provide greater legal support. We're also engaged on the finance side with looking at the potential for inclusive economy institutions, foundations, and I guess I would call them sort of angel donors who are in that space right now, inclusive economy. We're very interested in having some connections with them and understanding at what point they can be asked to channel some of their funds into what we're doing. So I think that finance piece is also very important. And then I think the Black business organizations are very important. The Atlanta Business League, et cetera, are very important also in this ecosystem. And we have some cooperative associations. The Georgia Cooperative, it has another term, Georgia Cooperative Association. I think I'm missing a word. So I think the associations of cooperatives are very important, along with the financial institutions, a link to legal support, and then the educational arena.
Yeah, I can second. I can second all of what Dr. Hewitt's put forward. I think a strong ecosystem is represented by some EO expertise, or at least knowledge. I think that's one of the gaps right now. First, there's awareness, but then there's also who are the folks on the ground who are going to be able to execute transactions. And Project Equity is doing some work to build ecosystem capacity through some work we're doing to educate service providers, those folks, including business brokers, CPAs, attorneys, and other advisors of business owners. So all of those folks have to be educated about employee ownership. That's one piece. The capital piece. We haven't delved into this, but the way that we transition businesses to employee ownership is through a mechanism called a leverage buyout, which is a requisite of the availability of loan capital. And there are only so many capital providers who will engage these transactions for reasons having to do with guarantors, right? We don't expect workforces to be guarantors. So capital is a big portion, is an important part of a strong ecosystem. Project Equity has stood up a capital fund such that we're able to fund these transactions, but also so that we can attract other capital providers to the space. I think it's important that economic development and policy folks begin to elevate employee ownership as a legitimate strategy supporting local economies. I think that helps to underpin the ecosystem. And then I'm being a little bit redundant here, but it's the technical assistance piece that's really important, in that folks understand, number one, how to talk about employee ownership, but then number two, how it is to actually execute transactions. Those are all important pieces of a strong ecosystem.
Thank you. We've got a juicy question here, and I want to just say thank you to the attendee that posed it, because it's just been undergirding the entire conversation. When we talk about employee ownership in Black communities, we're talking about race in this country. And there is an incredibly fraught sort of context that we're operating in. So we have to acknowledge that with realism. The question that's posed to both of you begins with a statement. We have found in my community that white sellers are not as open as we'd hope to sell businesses to Black owners and Black workers. What are some ideas to work around this issue? And I'll let whoever would like to answer first to answer.
Sure. So we're not naive to that. And, to that end, we are, as part of our going forward strategy, and a piece of our Black employee ownership work is our ability, Project Equity's ability, to be able to do an acquisition-like model that allows us to be able to acquire a business from an owner and do some of the transition work on the back end. at the end of the day, I think that our transition process, and likely, I believe if this question is coming from a practitioner, the transition process that compels the legacy owner and the workforce to have to engage in a process over a period of time. If that owner has certain biases or prejudices, that's not an environment for having a successful transition. They won't even engage the transition. I think if you have the equivalent of a proxy buyer, owners are happy to walk away with value for their business, and and then we can go ahead and do some transition work on the back end. So I think that's one way of approaching it. I don't want to take up all the time. I would love Dr. Hewitt has any further comment.
I don't have experience with that, but I think that what's important that we might be able to offer is leadership studies. Part of it is to know who we are as African people, African heritage people, and where we've been, where we're going. I think once you strengthen the core of individuals, they can see themselves differently, and they even approach a transaction differently. So I would just add that to what Evans has said.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question because I want to respect everybody's time. We can't cover the whole lot of it because we're only an hour talking about this, but I feel really great about how this dialogue is going. I'm going to combine 3 questions. So the overarching framework is people want to know more about roles. So we have questions on what is the role of worker centers in the promotion of Black employee ownership? What is the role of investors in supporting Black employee ownership most effectively? And finally, what do you see as the role of economic developers in helping business owners find the path to employee ownership? And those collated questions are to both of you.
Well, maybe I'll jump out and make some quick comments so that, given the time, Evan can elaborate more on these things. The first one was the role of worker centers, and I think it's a good idea to bring this information to worker centers so that they can distribute it among workers who can then consider this pathway. Again, it's a pathway for those who may be non-confrontational, and that's sort of a characteristic of some people, and it can activate people within the labor movement who are not necessarily on the front line. The second, I'm sorry, I need you to restate the other 2.
The second and third roles were investors and economic developers.
Okay, investors, I will say that I think I've said that I'm interested in those, and particularly the ones that I'm mostly aware of now are those who are in the inclusive economy networks. So even if you were to Google that, you see there must be at least 65 different inclusive economy programs operating in every type of, from left to right. So that space I find an interesting one. And then in terms of community development, clearly enabling the cities are able to impact investment opportunities that reach the citizens. So I think there's a big role to talk with the city governments, because those areas that have been very successful with employee ownership, I noticed that the cities have had initiatives that support it.
Yeah, I'll approach these questions in reverse order. I think economic development folks are important because they can help to elevate amongst the business community the importance of retaining small and middle market businesses in that local economy. And use a bully pulpit, so to speak, to influence business owners. Hey, there are models whereby you can transition ownership of your business to owners, the workers, who are going to keep it local, keep it in this economy, preserve your legacy, et cetera. So I think economic development is important because they have reach to local businesses through other programs that they execute and can be influencers. Investors, I think, are really important insofar as providing the type of capital that is necessary for more employee ownership transitions to happen. I've mentioned before that there's the need for more flexible capital because, again, in our transition methodology, we do not obligate the workers to any sort of personal guarantee. And so with that in mind, your typical business lender is not going to support these transactions. It's part of our work to influence them that they should, and that's part of Project Equity's work over time. But in the meantime, being able to engage investors who can provide flexible capital that will allow for these transitions to happen is really key aspect of growing employee ownership, supporting it. I think worker centers are important because oftentimes workers will have some knowledge of the business that they are employed at, that owner having some desire to potentially retire and not necessarily knowing what direction that owner is going to take. I think when workers have awareness of employee ownership, they can help influence their place of employment to move in the direction of a transition at the appropriate time. So I'm hoping I captured each of those items sufficiently.
Wonderful, comprehensive answers. I appreciate both of you all. I want to, in the interest of time, we will wrap now, but I'd like to let all the participants know that if you have any additional questions or comments, we welcome you to reach out directly to Project Equity at the URL that's on the screen. As has been previously stated, there's a lot to happen and to uncover in this conversation, but I recommend as a starting point to read the papers. Both papers are incredible, and they make the case that we've come across today from two different perspectives. Before we end, I'd like to give Dr. Hewitt and Evan an opportunity to say any famous last words, and then we'll bid you adieu.
What I'd like to add is that our immediate outreach project is in the development of the website, and I'd like to particularly thank Prudential Financial for their support in this phase of our development. And I guess I'll stop there. Thank everybody for listening to this and being a part of it.
Yeah, I'll just say that I'd like to thank Dr. Hewitt for her partnership and the enlightenment that she shared with me. Again, I'd like to thank Morehouse College more broadly for working with us on this, and the Delta Fund and Prudential for supporting this work. We can't do this important work without their financial support. So thank you very much. And again, Dr. Hewitt, I appreciate you. And thank you, Terron. Well done.
Thank you all. Thank you all for the time. And let's not pass the buck, but pass the torch. See you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.